Chapter 2 Strengths. Being quarry means that you're big and strong and scary when your sole want in this world is to be respected and admired. Being quarry means that you were always accused of being the bully, even when you were the victim. Being quarry means that you were the one that always got picked for fights, even when you did not want to. Being quarry means growing up mean and angry and having no real choice in the matter. Thea considered licking the frosting off the edge of his nose. As they held the 2 pieces of gingerbread, she pondered the white dollop with a smile. She had placed it there as a small joke, a little sign of affection. So Cupcake realized it was no surprise that he had not removed it. Together, they held the pieces of gingerbread that would make up the roof, leaning across the table to one another. They tried other ways over the years, but simply trying to hear each piece of the frame of the house only resulted in sliding off. Likewise, leaving it on its side to dry as one piece made it uneven and hard to place. No, this way was fine. They simply held their house together, and if they were patient, giving, and willing to adjust, they would come together. Cupcake continued to stare across to her husband as he smiled back at her. She had considered licking the frosting off the end of his nose, but she knew that he had left it there simply because he was the one who placed it. He had let it sit there as a token of her affection. So she left it there, shimmering in the morning light as she looked upon his happy face. As history unfolds, it leaves behind strings of causality behind it. Things play out one way or another, and all things move on currents that are beyond mortal perception. Things happen in Equestria for a reason, and there, as in many other reality, history shimmers and shakes at the teeniest of movements. So one wonders what would have happened had they not met at the gazebo. What if Carrot, who had been nervously walking around the outside of the gazebo, had not turned back and began trotting in the opposite direction? What would have happened if Cupcake had simply walked around and around the outside as well, looking for him but never seeing him? What if she, or he, had given up and simply walked away heartbroken? One shudders to think of the implications. However, for all the happiness and fear, of all the gladness and sadness that would follow, something made Carrot turn around and begin to circle backwards around the gazebo as he began to fuss and worry. It caused them once again meet nose to nose. As they stood there with their noses pressed together again, as the sound of the band had occupied the gazebo fell over them slightly. A smile grew on her face as she looked at her nose, looking first away with a small blush, and then back up to him as she saw her express on Mira's face. She spoke.
Hello, Carrot.
She said with a nervous giggle.
I was going around, don't you know?
Yes, me too, he said with a little laugh. Good thing I turned around. It was a good thing indeed. They smiled happily as they looked at each other. Soon the welcome feel of the unexpected touch began to fade. He fed something from a nearby park bench, and with that the two went off through the village square, leaving behind the music of the band to float over the cobblestones. As they walked together down the streets, Cupcake realized he had retrieved a picnic basket. As they went, she wondered what pretty scene or secluded spot he had chosen for this little rendezvous. What beautiful space he could have selected. Her face curled up in an unimpressed smirk as they followed the river to an open space just opposite a familiar structure.
So, we came back to the mill then,
she said, while she looked past him to the big brick building beyond. Yeah, I saw this spot here the other day and... he said, as he lowered the blanket over a spot of mown grass beneath a vast sycamore tree. At once, his eyes flashed open, and a look of pride disappeared from his face. Back to the... Oh, dang it! I just thought... I mean, if you want to go someplace else... He began dancing his toes a bit and turned to face her. All at once, he seemed to be at once trying to finish laying the blanket and gather it back up. I thought that... this well... At once, a touch of hoof brought back to his attention.
Oh, it's not a bad spot,
she said.
Let's give it a go.
He calmed, and he looked down to where her hoof touched his. With a smile, they spread the blanket once more, and from the basket came their lunch.
Oh, Carrot,
she says, little trays of assorted treats were spread out before her.
It all looks so good. Did you make them yourself?
Yes, I did. It's my mark, you see, he said, pride filling him as she took her first few bites of a pastry.
I I saw that. It matches your name well. I like baking too.
C replied as he poured them both tall glasses of sun tea. I noticed that when I saw your mark, he spoke as he prepared her glass, it matches your name too. She looked over her own body, back down to where the 3 cupcakes stood in stark contrast to her coat that shimmered in the spring sunlight. They stood out visibly from the shade of blue that she herself never really defined, her mark contrasting her tones.
Well, I'm quite good at baking if I do say so myself, she began. But it's not the baking itself that got me my mark, but the celebrations I plan to go with them.
Cupcake arched an eyebrows. He looked down at the cult. He continued to pour the tea, even as it spilled over the side of the glass. She realized that his eyes were still on her mark, her flank. She gave a polite little cough that brought him back to his senses. Oh, sorry, he cried, going from a contented sound to one small panic in one breath. He lifted away the overfilled glass and poured it back into the carafe. As he looked away with a blush across his face, she put her hoof across her mouth to hide her smile, and conceal her own blush. It would have been unseemly coming from any other cult to have them eyeing her so. Yet his moment of gazing caused her no alarm. She giggled at how surprised he had been.
He just wants to be with me, to talk with me,
she whispered under her breath. I'm sorry, did you say something? He asked, sliding the glass across the blanket to her.
Oh, no, nothing too important.
She began taking a small sip.
So,
she asked,
do you enjoy working at the mill?
No, not really, he said with a sigh, sitting down on the blanket heavily. Please, don't get me wrong. I appreciate Mr. Ledger giving me a job. Miss Ivory's dad, he's really helped me out. It's hard for those of us who can't get apprenticeships. He's really done us all a favor, all the cults of Phillies in there. He nodded towards the mill, looking it over a long second as he did. But, he said with a sigh, if you can't get an apprenticeship in something that matches your mark, and you can't afford school, there's not much other than the mill or the army. And I was too thin, the recruiter said. She looked up at him and saw the disappointment creased across his face.
I wish I had your problem, Carrot,
she said, offering him some soft reassurance.
I've only ever been too round.
Carrot smiled. This time he knew exactly what it was that he was expected to say. You're not round. He spoke with some certainty.
Oh, don't fit to me,
she called as she turned around with a disappointed glance. She looked up just in time to see all the color drain out of his face.
Don't worry about it,
she said with a smile, realizing how unfair it was.
It's a bit of a trick question.
With a great sigh of relief, Carrot turned to prepare finishing their little lunch. As he did, he talked about 1,000 tiny things, their preferences, their likes, their wants, and their dreams. As he did, gates of knowing opened up between them, the strings of causality wrapped around the two. She looked up and saw something in his face as he spoke about getting his job at the mill. As Carrot talked, she felt a cart go by on the big white wooden bridge behind him. She saw an old pony with a crumpled hat pulling across the wheels, sounding across the boards. She looked back to Carrot and saw the light falling out behind the sycamore upon him. Carrot stopped speaking and turned to ask her a question. He had been about to evoke the oldest of all equestrian pickup lines. How did you get your mark? When instead he saw the winds run through the tones of her mane. He looked at her face as he looked into his, caught the rose-colored eyes once more. As he drifted in her stare, the water wheel across the river went around and around with soft wet sounds. He broke the gaze and looked up to the sycamore. Deep inside the tree, something fluttered about, and he raised a little call. Cookie tilted her head as he gave a whistle. To her pleasure, one bird answered his call, and another. Soon 2 sets of chickadees were perched upon the handle of the basket. Together, the ponies dropped crumbs from their lunch at the birds ate happily with the sounds, or carried off into the fledglings to their nests beyond, the newborn birds growing strong in the new spring. Soon other birds joined them. Cupcake and Carrot began tearing off pieces of pastries and throwing them to the ducks that came waddling up to the grassy beach to where they sat. Carrot could only smile as Cupcake left behind the broken bits of pastry in the hollow between her hooves and leaned forward. Fetched her some little ducklings soon ate directly from her offered hooves. Their gullets full, the ducks settled into a shade beneath the sycamore as well, dozing quietly beside the ponies. There was a great splash, and Carrot and Cupcake looked up to see the fast 2 white birds let themselves from the mill pond.
Oh, Carrot, Look, the swans, she called as she sat upright, causing the ducks to come awake and visit. They're beautiful. The two trumpeter swans made their way purposely up to where the picnic was set. Oh, and are they not? Said Cupcake, wrapping one of her hose around Carrot's foreleg and leaning into it slightly. Carrot inflated himself and began breaking a croissant in half. As the swans came near, he tossed both halves to the birds. To their surprise, they seemed to eat their halves in seemingly 2 bites and began pecking away through their lunch, as though it had been set up for their enjoyment. Hey, birds! Called a rather alarmed Carrot as he stood and attempted to gather up his tray of pastries. At once, the male swan hissed at him and bit his hoof. As the surprise yelled past his lips, Carrot reached in once more to retrieve the quickly disappearing evidence of his craft. This only resulted in him being hissed at once again and getting his other hoof bitten by the swan. Carrot darted in and gathered up his tray. The great white bird spread its wings and hissed once more. As Carrot attempted to save the pastries, it was all that Cupcake, the ducks, and the chickadees could do to watch without laughing, as the female swan ate her fill, and the male swan chased a rather put-upon-looking carrot cake around the picnic in a wide circle. The bird kept flapping its wings, hissing at the pony who tried to face it down and make up a rather fabricated, unimposing threats against it. Every so often, he was stuffed from dizziness or general exhaustion. This would only result in the swan biting his flank and sending the pony once more running around in circles. As Cupcake watched, she could not help but smile. Soon she was laughing, despite her attempts not to. Laughing so hard that it awoke the duckling that sat on her forelegs. Laughing so hard that the female swan looked up from her feasting with a judgmental glance. There was a pause. As a heaving Carrot sat in the grass, the male swan grabbed up a pastry and ate it. With that, the two swans traded positions. And now, as the male swan ate his fill and beheld a laughing Cupcake, it was the female who bit and hissed at a rather deflated-looking carrot cake. Cupcake could not keep herself from laughing, from looking upon the poor pony who slowly circled the scene. Every so often he would look to her, look like he was afraid that she was mocking him, that she was soon to leave the disaster that was unfolding. She tried to show him that, as she understood, she did not mean to be laughing. That was not his fault. He tried so hard. As he looked back to her with pensive eyes, hers were calm and even understanding as she laughed. Before long, the swans had eaten all they cared to eat, and settled far away began to nap. Carrot Cake slowly walked back to the blanket and looked over the ruins of the picnic. An entire night's worth of baking sat ruined, now only fit for the birds. Miss Cupcake, I'm so sorry. This isn't going so well, he said, shaking the crumbs out of a tray. I'm sorry.
May I have another glass of tea?
She asked, as he slid the glass back over to where he sat, trying her best not to awake the ducklings that slumbered in her outstretched hooves. He looked down to her glass and then back up to her, and once he filled her glass before returning it.
I don't know whether to go awe at the cuteness or sigh romantically at the romantic moment we've got going here. I know it's not what you were hoping for,
she said as she looked over at the desecrated remains of the picnic.
But I do appreciate it. I've had enough to eat, and please don't stop trying. I do appreciate it this day.
Of course. You're welcome. I'm so glad, he said, smiling back down to her. Together they sat wordlessly, drinking their tea and watching the warm spring day play out across the mill pond. Across the way, a small strand of cherry trees was surrendering its pink petals to the ground. As they were tossed in the small breezes or floated around the surface of the water, they twirled around in a wash from the big mill wheel. The wheel carried out its constant rhythm as a perfect cadence, the wet sound seeming almost like a heartbeat. The sound reached Cupcake as she sat there next to him. The smells of the forest beyond carried the water over the river. It reached them with a sweet scent, as soon as she felt herself becoming heavy. As a small piece of ducklings and cascades of warm air drifted around, she felt her eyes close. With that, her hand lowered upon the nearest inviting place. There was a heartbeat nearby. As it matched the turn of the mill, her senses sought it. Soon her head was tucked into space from whence it sounded. Carrot gave a small sound. As he looked down at Cupcake's head lay across his forelegs, pressed across his chest. Inside his mind sang happily as he soon gave small breaths. With that, she was asleep across his outstretched legs. Colt fought to think of the right thing to do. He had wanted to do so much today. So many plans. So many things he wanted to show her. Would it be right to wake her? No, of course not. Not with the small look of contentment that laid on the serene face. Instead, all he could do was look across the body of the lovely mare, ponder the perfect shades of her coat, her mane. How very much like her eyes, her mane and tail were. The tones of rose floated into and out of each other, playing upon one another in highlights the pale sympathies of a shade so much happier than pink, so much humbler than red. Her coat, he realized, was a shade of blue that could only be spoken out in poetry. Words like turquoise, cerulean, these all failed to capture the perfection of the shade. There was only one word for it, only one that came close. Beautiful. She was beautiful. Inside, the cold words grew, phrases he did not know how to articulate, how to tell her she was beautiful, but that her beauty alone was not why he felt this way. How to tell her how little it mattered that she was round. Yes, she was a little round. That he knew, but pleasantly so. Pleasantly so. In his head, the fact that only repeat himself was this: that this mare had wanted to spend time with him, had chosen to give him this chance. How could he not try, no matter how badly it went? Is it okay to tell a mare these things on a first date? The same smells that drawn her now reached him as well. Those wonderful scents that sprang along the river and the pond that spread over them. Suddenly these questions did not matter. Suddenly the feel of her head upon his legs made up the whole world. With that, he too lowered his head and placed it gently along hers. The ponies lay there together upon a checkered blanket as the light fell softly through the branches of the sycamore. The soft cadence of the water wheel sounded out on a happy rhythm. And somewhere, Pear Butter and Bright Apple are making out a storm and are nosing the romantic cuddling and decide to move somewhere else before anything major can happen. Miss Cupcake, came a soft voice. Miss Cupcake? Cupcake raised her head and looked around in a bit of a surprise. When she looked at him, insight grew across her face and at once she began to apologize.
Oh no, Kenneth! Did I fall asleep? For how long?
She said as she raised her hoof and began to straighten her mane. Oh, not so long. Only about an hour or two. Or far, he said, trying to keep up a smile.
Oh, you're fibbing to me again,
she said, looking upon his face as it drew down pain.
I could tell. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, really. He stammered, even as his face contorted.
If it's okay, why do you look upset?
She asked, her whole face shaking. Because my legs are starting to wake up, he whispered in a whisper of pain. She pondered this for a moment and looked down to where her head had been resting. As the cold struggled to stand, the pain shot through him. She felt herself smiling up to him as he winced. As he wobbled, she began to giggle, offering her own forelegs to help him stand. The remains of the picnic were soon cleared away, and together the two went up the hill back into the city. The days shifted from afternoon to evening as they walked and talked, stopping to look over the stalls of market goods, or just observing the ponies that walked past. Soon their thoughts turned to dinner. The avian befuddled meal beside the river lost its potency. We could eat at the bistro, or Trott's Cafe, or the restaurant, the Seabiscuit Hotel, or... He began rolling out the names of places to eat nearby.
The Seabiscuit,
she said, turning that way, gathering his hoof once more to follow.
They have such a lovely grease, you know.
He marveled once more at decisiveness. How much she seemed to know what she wanted. Dinner progressed well enough, even though the waiter dropping carrot salad upon the colt's lap made for some small discomfort. As the waiter apologized, Carrot helped him tidy up. Cupcake's small laughter looked around again, and he looked at her once more with worried eyes. Yet kindness sat upon her face. The colt was trying so hard, she knew. Wanted this to be special.
Just keep trying,
she spoke to herself.
That's all I ask, that you just keep trying.
When he finished their search and headed back out into the city, they saw how quickly time had passed. The fireflies were once more making long, luminescent trails across the scenes, and following them, the two arrived back at the fairy park where their time together had begun. To their amazing, the band was still playing, the soft sounds still drifting across the gazebo as the panorama of stars overhead crept over them. Is there anything I could get you? he asked as they sat together upon the bench. The shop across the way is still open. I'm pretty sure they have roasted almonds. Would you like? Karen felt her lean closer into him as the spring air began to turn chilly. Filled her hope to ask for his. Oh, okay, he said with a smile, gathering her hope beside his, leaning back into her in the slightest as the music still floated around them. All too soon, it was too dark for the band to read their notes, the small lights of the magical lanterns not providing enough to overcome the shroud of darkness. Close aside, the two lifted themselves from the bench. Carrot grabbed up the hidden picnic basket and laid a few bits in the glass jar that sat before the gazebo. As the band gathered their things up, they wished the two good night. With that, Carrot let Cupcake lead him towards what he assumed was their home. Wow, you have a beautiful house, he said, looking upon the tall, pillared dwelling, one so large it was visible even as they turned down the block.
It's not mine. I'm staying with Ivory and a family for the moment,
spoke Cupcake, her voice falling down to tremble. Carrot almost tripped over the tone. It was so different from anything he heard from her. He nearly stopped to ask her if anything was wrong, but once she gave a small laugh and pointed to the wide porch as they entered the gates around the house and its garden.
Oh, look,
she said in a tone that was the same sarcastic and happy.
Mother's leading up for me.
Carrot ran his hoof to his mane, ran his tongue along his seat to make sure none of his dinner clung there in anticipation of meeting her family. Still, even as he readied himself, he wondered why Cupcake's mother would be at Ivory's house. As he got his first look, he realized why Cupcake was still giggling. Ivory herself smiled upon them as he led Cupcake up the steps, the other mare moving aside to make room for them.
Oh, Ive, did I miscarry you?
Kay asked in a falsely pained tone of worry.
Oh, Cupcake,
she said with a laugh. As the two mares turned back to face Carrot, their expressions fell. As the colt stood there in the porch lights, his smile was small, his unhappiness hidden behind it portly.
Carrot, what's wrong?
Gasped Cupcake, trying back out their home. Miss Cupcake, he said, his ears falling back in worry. Now that it's over, I had to ask, despite the swans and the salad, and not actually doing all that much. He took a breath. Miss Cupcake, did you have a good time? May I see you again? He took a larger breath. I really enjoyed being with you. Did you enjoy spending time with me? I really hope you did. I really hope. Equestrians rub noses on any number of occasions, and that's simply reserved for those who are growing their relationship. The ed occupies a position in their interactions that say many things. An elementary student may rub noses with a favorite teacher on the last day of school. A child might rub noses with a beloved cousin whom they have not seen in months. A colt may often rub noses with both parents before he leaves for university for the first time, or when all of his things depart their home for the last time. It's an appropriate greeting for a pony to give their parents on the occasion of handing them their newborn grandchildren. It's that much more than a hug. It means less than a kiss. So it must be said that one offered up at the end of a first date means things must have gone very well by most measurable standards.
Yes,
it said, as Cupcake took a step forward to lift her nose to his.
I did have a good time. I promise I did.
Yes. Diane spoke as he lowered himself slightly into her, and let her begin the small warm motion. Yes, please. I want to see you again. Yes. It called in very clear terms, that as they touched themselves with each other, let the feeling of this contact fly between them for a long moment.
I really like being with you.
Ivory looked upon them with a small smile as they lifted their noses from one another, looked at one another for a long while as they said their goodbyes.
Get it?
Came Cupcake's voice, lifted into the cool breeze of the spring night. Miss Cupcake? He answered, teetering slightly on the stairs.
Would you please call me Cupcake from now on?
She asked as he stood in the doorway.
I'd like it if you would, you know.
Oh, of course, replied the colt, tilting his head to watch her as the door slowly closed. Of course. Good night, Cupcake.
Good night,
she called back as the thick white door closed behind her. That was too bad. As though the door, she could not see how he had taken a deep breath, how he had gone cantering out through the garden towards the gate with a large dopey smile on her face. She could not see how he had spun, given joyful whoops as he leapt through the air on like a wild horse,
his joy running through him. And if he starts singing, I'm singing in the rain, I'm gonna join him. Even when he was far beyond the door, he was still running, laughing and calling out joyfully. Out he went, running through the fields beyond the city, dancing among the fireflies that flickered and lit in the wake of his passing. "She wants to see me again!" he called out loud as he ran past the trees behind the old dance hall. His calls immediately stopped and his eyes went wide as he tripped over one of the many strings of causality that had been built that day, this one taking the form of a couple who had been hidden among the tall grasses. As he rubbed from his head, he looked at the scowling stallion and giggling mare. For a brief moment, he could not decide whether to apologize or ask for advice. Back within the house, the door closed, and at once the enthusiastic Ivory spun around to retreat upon her dearest friend.
"From that display of affection, I assumed all went well intended,"
she began. Soon all she could do was look at Cupcake. The mare stood in the hallway, her hoof lifted to her face. As upon silence, he smiled and smiled and smiled.
"Oh, Cupcake, do stop!"
giggled Ivory.
"Stop what, Ive?"
answered Cupcake in a small tone.
"You're beaming. You're simply radiant, Cuppy."
Entering the smiling mare as he looked at her hoof. Slowly, gently, she returned Cupcake's face towards the hallway mirror. Cupcake looked deep within, saw her white smile, saw the reflection and look of happiness on her face she had never seen before. It seemed almost to encompass all of her. It was almost as though a visible aura of contentment swept through the length of her body.
"He wants to be with me, Ive. He doesn't want anything from me except to just be with me. I fell asleep with my head close to his chest."
Cupcake stood staring in the mirror, her hoof moving slowly to her nose. Ivory stared on with that wide smile, tilting her head back and forth to ponder her friend.
"Oh, Ive."
Cupcake sighed, her voice first soft, rolling around inside an emotion, then ending in a tone of realization.
"I'm falling in love, Ive. I'm falling in love."
Ivory lifted Cupcake's chin so her head rested across her withers, gathering her friend in a deep hug. She spoke softly, rocking her back and forth.
"I'm so happy for you, Cupcake,"
she said as he smiled.
"Oh, Cuppy, I'm so happy for you."
Even as that evening drew to a close for Cupcake and Carrot, the strings of causality upon which they had plucked continued to make their quiet music. In the reaches beyond Ponyville, there sat a little farmhouse. Even as the dark of the spring night settled around the house, little voices of insects lit down across the farm, a single room within was still illuminated by candlelight. The stallion walked slowly up and down the room, listening with a tired smile as the foal upon his back went on and on about their latest triumph.
"Those are the biggest balloons yet! They're the balloontastic, ballerific! Do you think we can find bigger balloons next week? Oh, how about bigger brighter paper for the presents? Oh, that's right! I'm out of ribbon! I need more ribbon! Ding! Ding! How about beyond that? Looks like..."
Once he stopped, he was almost surprised by her sudden silence as he had been her waking calls, the ones that had sent her into her room in alarm. The stallion turned, looked at her with a thankful smile as a great vast yawn consumed the face of his little filly. "Here now, time for bed," he said as the filly slowly laid her head against his withers once more.
"But... oh, I want to play my next party,"
she said blurrily as her mother entered the room with quiet hooves.
"Hush, hush, hush,"
spoke her mother.
"How can you be so mean to tomorrow?"
"What?"
asked the little pony, almost surprised by her mother's question.
"What do you mean by mean, Mama?"
"With all the little wonderful things tomorrow has planned for you, how can you still be awake?"
asked her mother with a small smile.
"Oh my gosh!"
called the little filly, her head wobbling around tiredness.
"You're not going to sleep and give me tomorrow! It'll still be today! Kinda."
With that, she reached out her foreleg, let her mother lift her gently. With that revelation, the three went up the stairs. They entered the room quietly, and the best let the other three filly sleep as they laid this one on her bed.
"Good night, Kiss. Good night, Kiss. Oh, how I wish,
Began the little filly as they tucked her in, the sing-song becoming quieter as he went.
"Oh, wait.
She says he planted her kisses on her in turn.
Kiss and wish don't rhyme. Oh.
As they made their way out of the room,
The mayor was surprised that he did not follow her to the bedroom. Instead, he headed down the stairs. Soon the sound of the door opening sounded through the house.
Clyde,
She asked his worried tone followed. Our host went silent upon the stairs, going gingerly out into the night air. Yes, I know they have canon names, but I'm too tired to look them up, and gosh darn it if I haven't gotten used to calling them Inky, Blinky, Clyde, and Blinky. She found him sitting not far from the house. The stallion sat there, staring up into the night sky, looking at the parameters of stars that fell over his farm.
Clyde,
She asked again as she sat beside her husband.
dear, are you well? Are you not tired, love?
I have fallen into me enough sugar to keep me awake long for a fortnight,
he said with a small laugh. Roxy laid her head on his withers, sighing in sympathy.
If it all makes her happy,
He said, leaning his hand upon hers.
I shall have a party every week for the rest of me days. I saw a party that told me blood runs frosting and I sweat punch and cider.
The two laughed, looked down to the landscape beyond the rock farm.
Oh, Roxy,
He said, closing his eyes and drawing her closer to him.
she saved us all. She made this happy family happy and whole with her Mark. Bless her.
Oh, Picamina,
Said the mayor, drinking his warmth as the spring chill set in.
all spark of smiles. The girls are so happy now, with how much better these weeks have been.
Clyde's head fell, and at once she drew him up.
What's wrong, love?
She asked steadily beneath his chin.
I have nothing for her, Roxy. I don't have anything but sex my heart to give her. I know nothing of the world her Mark has opened up for her. I've only ever been quiet. You know that.
Clyde swallowed hard, his head falling once again. Inside a moment, he felt her host touching beneath his chin, gently lifting his face to look into hers.
You've only ever been my stallion, Clyde. You've only been the ever stallion I've loved. Whatever the future holds, you'll find a way for her, for all our girls. I know that. I believe that.
She said, slowly raising herself to him, rising to lay her cheek to his. He held his mare there, beneath the stars, as he looked out across the stretches of fields of rock. Soon Clyde closed his eyes, gathered her deeper into himself, and shared his warmth to her. He opened his eyes, looked out across the fields, and breathed a gentle invoke.
Oh, Celestia,
He whispered,
help me. This isn't to be her world. Help me. Let me find some place for my Pinky. Help me make her happy.
With that, the two stood, she motioning for him to follow, to make for their room, and the bed beyond wherein they would lie in their shared embrace and wait the coming day. He went with her, his hoof in hers, and they made for the door. Yet even as they went, his ears perked up. Streams of causality flowed from the rock farm, snapping taut to the ponies over the hills in Ponyville. As these connections were made, it seemed to him that a voice carried on a small spring breeze, only just audible over the sounds of the insects that chirped happily in the spring night. Clyde shook his head and laughed to himself as he opened the door for his wife. He must have eaten far too many cupcakes, he thought, and was hearing things on the breeze. With that, he disappeared inside, and night finally settled into the little farmhouse. The breeze blew once more, and though there were no ponies to hear the murmur, it seemed to repeat itself. Fear not. Don't be afraid. It seemed to whisper in the slightest of defying giggles.
I am working upon it. I am working upon it indeed.
Being quarry means that you learn very quickly to have ponies look upon you. They either feel a smirky superiority or fear. You prefer fear. Being quarry means they will use big fancy words to confuse you or intimidate you into doing things their way. You silence them with acts of savagery and then do things your way. Being quarry means knowing that some ponies will talk down to you like a child. You learned long ago to answer them with shouts of wrath. Being quarry means knowing all these things, staying up long into the night wondering if it could ever be any different. Some people might wonder how I came to start deciding my style of interspacing certain parts of the text with my own comments, jokes, snide remarks, or even riffs if I'm dealing with a bad fic. Or even doing reviews of the fanfics at the end of each story. Well, some of the live readers I had listened, not the well-known ones, but I think it was one of the ones that did the one where the story where Dark Conquest came from, where he proceeded to introspect his own comments. He actually let some of the things in the story fly by, like sounds from outside, stuff like that. I kind of like that style. Plus, it doesn't help that my own style usually revolves around me actually doing this. When I say I'm live reading, I mean I'm live reading. What you're hearing are some of my voices, my thoughts, as I encounter some of this stuff. Some of these things are improv, some of them are just me coming up with slowly with ideas. Sometimes I might come up with a silly little side remark that sounds interesting when I pull it off. And really, it's for my own entertainment. As I've always said, I just like having ideas out there. I don't like keeping them in. The idea of having a small group team, like Trixie being my boss, that kind of slowly came over time with doing a series based off Luniverse. I like the whole idea of me having a show and doing a show story, so I figured, okay, why not have Trixie and everybody else be actual stars? Why not have them treat them as cast? Shigeru Miyamoto once said that the characters of Super Mario Brothers are actors. They're there for whatever role they put them in, not really focusing on a single story. And that's how I felt with the Luniverse cast and even the main six. These are not the canon mares when I do these voices. These are just the actors in this story. As time went on, we'll see me coming up with better ideas. But at the moment when I first started this, I just figured, okay, I'm doing a show, I've got this cast, and all this setup. And that's kind of how it went for that first year. It's kind of interesting to just see that and think of where we've gone.